Resume recording. Yeah, the basic thing is the individual. When you're talking about the individual, right? So that is the basic level, right? We are talking at an individual level, the organism, the single organism level, right? So obviously, when an individual is present, so we'll consider its environment, how it is actually interacting with the other things, right? That is fine. But the next level of organization is population, right? So we know in 2021 we are going for the census, right? We are going to count how much population India has. So when you talk about the population, the number of organisms belonging to the same species, that is what the population means, right? The population means number of organisms belonging to the same species. That means when you talk about Indian population, you'll be talking about the human population. You will not count the buffalo population as well and say the population is really high, right? So you cannot count the grass population or the tree population. That is the entire different statistics, right? So when you talk about census and the Indian population, we are talking about the humans present, right? And when it comes to the humans, anyone of irrespective of their age group, we are counting. The only requirement we are taking as the human, right? But other than that, we can count at the individual level as well. That means what is the male population, what is the female population, what is the child population, what is the adult population, right? So if you take a criteria and specific to that criteria, whichever the organisms that were actually present, the entire thing we call it population, right? So at the ecological perspective, right, in the biosphere, so obviously when you talk about population, we will be counting all the living organisms, right? It is not just only the humans, but the ants also, right? The ant population, so grass population, the microbial population, everything we will be counting, right? That is population. So the next one is the community. So when you talk about community, obviously ozone urbana is a gated community. Why it is called a community? Because we are not the only species living over there, right? When you enter into the ozone urbana, you can see the various number of plant species and grass species and different animals, right? So when you talk about community, different organisms living together in a particular geographical area in a unit time, right? So when you talk about community, different organisms, as you can see here in the community, so obviously we can see many different types of animals and plants, right? And we are calling together as a community. It is not about one species, right? Many number of species living in a particular geographical area in a specific time, right? We call it a community. And the next one is the ecosystem. So when you talk about ecosystem, is a functional, structural and functional component of a biosphere, right? It is a structural and functional component of a biosphere. That is what ecosystem is. So what is ecosystem? Why it is called the structural and functional component? The ecosystem is because ecosystem is the area where all the biotic and abiotic factors interact and live as a system, right? So when you call as a system, so obviously this computer is a system. Why? Whatever the things that are happening, that is solely confined to this particular system, right? So whatever the reactions may happen, whatever the changes may happen, that happens only in this particular thing. In that way, when you talk about ecosystem, so all the interactions happen within that particular geographical space. That is what we call ecosystem. And then the biome, right? So when you take the entire earth into the consideration, right? So there are a few places where the physical climatic factors, right, become similar, right? Even though they are geographically separated, right? Even though they are geographically separated, so different areas have the similar physical features, right? All those together we call it a single biome. That means deserts, right? Desert, do we have only in India? No, everywhere we have the deserts. So all the deserts together we call it a desert biome, right? All the deserts, all the grasslands, all the evergreen forests, right? All the freshwater biomes or the marine water biomes, together we call it a single biome, right? And finally the biosphere. So when you talk about biosphere, the entire earth with the life on it, that is biosphere. These are the levels of organization, okay? So the next one. So we are talking about living and non-living things, right? Let us understand what is living and non-living. In this particular thing, what you have to remember is the abiotic components, right? When it comes to abiotic components, what are the examples of abiotic components? How they will be interacting? This is what we have to study. So simple understanding, biotic means living things which has life, and abiotic which doesn't have life, right? How can you have something has a life? What is the quantifying features, right, or the qualifying features to say something has a life, right? So when you say some organism has some life, the first requirement it has to have is growth and reproduction. The first and foremost importance is for the growth and reproduction. So obviously when you take my Gebronics, right, speaker, so I really wanted to reproduce and become 2 tomorrow, but it will not happen. It is a non-living thing. But if I say, where is Bapu Gowda? He's in room. Okay. If I say Bapu Gowda Desai, so obviously in future we'll get junior Bapu Gowda Desai, right? So because he has life, right? So the simple first prime importance is it has to grow and reproduce. The second important thing is it has to have metabolism. It has to have metabolism. Metabolism means some reactions happening in the body. So the food you are taking is getting digested, and again the food you are taking is creating new molecules, right? That is called metabolism. Metabolism has to be there. And the third important thing is response to the stimuli. Response to the stimuli. That means if I give some stimulus, it has to respond, right? If I push you, you will move, right? If I slap you, you will slap me back. Response to the stimuli, right? If you put your hand in the fire, immediately you will pull it back. Response to the stimuli, right? So that response to the stimuli. Yeah, plants also do respond to the stimuli. That we have understood by the experiments of J.C. Bose, right? How do they respond? So when there is a sunlight, the plant tends to move towards the sunlight, response to the stimuli, right? And so whenever you plant something, the roots are actually responding to the stimuli, and the roots are moving down and the shoot is coming up towards the light, because photosynthesis has to happen. Response to the stimuli, right? So when you give more water, it will die. Response to the stimuli, right? When you give nutrients, it will absorb. Response to the stimuli, it will grow better. So the plants also do have life. These are the reasons why we say the plants have life. These are the factors. So all the plants, animals, fungi, bacteria comes under biotic, and in the abiotic, water, light, wind, soil, humidity, minerals, gases. All these combine together to form abiotic factors, right? So earth devoid of life is abiotic, right? That is abiotic factors. The next one is biogeochemical cycles. So this is a combination of 3 words: biogeochemical, right? Biogeochemical. What is bio? Life. Geo, earth, and chemical components, right? How these chemical components are moving within the life and also earth. That is what we are calling it biogeochemical cycles, right? So the basic one is hydrogen first, because hydrogen is a basic element which is present in sun, right? That is the basic element which has only 1 electron and 1 proton and 1 neutron. That is a basic molecule. So life is made up of hydrogen, and we cannot survive without hydrogen, water, right? How hydrogen is getting circulated? So obviously we call it water cycle, right? So fortunately or unfortunately, just a minute, give me a second. So this gas do we have in space? Hydrogen. No, in the space we do not have anything, but in the gigantic bodies we have hydrogen. Stars, nothing. Vacuum, as we speak, right? So the next one, the water. So when you talk about the water, so obviously how did we get water onto the surface of the earth? So fortunately or unfortunately, long back, about 3.5 before billion years ago, so before that, an icy asteroid has actually struck to the earth, right? An icy asteroid, because of which we got water. right? Many asteroids struck to many different planets, because of which we got water. So the water which has come, so obviously the water is getting evaporated because of temperature, because the boiling point of water is 100 degrees, right? When it is getting evaporated, again it is forming clouds, right? We people know how many different types of clouds, the basic clouds? 4. Cumulus, nimbus, cirrus, stratus, right? It will form one way, one cloud or the other. In that we have the combination cirrus, stratus, cumulonimbus, the combinations of the clouds, right? The basic are 4, right? It is forming clouds. So when the humidity, again another abiotic factor, when the humidity reaches 100%, what is happening? Again it is coming condensing as water. We call it precipitation or rainfall, right? Precipitation of rainfall. In that way, and this is how the water is getting circulated in the earth. So that water we are drinking, right? And when we drink the water, so obviously the hydrogen water is being broken down into the hydrogen and OH. That is being broken. And when the hydrogen is being transported, it is resulting in energy. And ultimately, whatever the water we take, we are using it for metabolism. And the excess water which we have, that is with that we are secreting in the form of urine or sweat. Right? Again, when we die, decomposition happens. Again, the whatever the biological molecules are present, it will be decomposed and the water will actually leave. So in that way, the water is actually, our hydrogen is actually moving within the life and towards the earth. Biogeochemical, right? That is water cycle. The next one is carbon cycle. The most important element in the entire universe is carbon, because it made life possible. Why only carbon is so special? Because the carbon can interact with almost any other element because of its combining capacity. We call it valency. Carbon valency is 4. That means the highest number of bonds that can be formed for any element is 4. So far known. Right? So far known, the highest number of bonds that can ever form is 4. And that capacity is only for the carbon. It can form single bond, 4 single bonds, 2 double bonds, and 1 triple bond. Right? In that way, it can interact with the diverse components. Right? That's why the carbon is so special. And the carbon has actually made the life possible. We are all carbon components. Right? Entire life is a carbon component. Right? So how the carbon is getting secreted, how the carbon is there, when the universe has actually present back then, about 4 billion years ago, at that time, the only gas that was present is the carbon dioxide. Right? About 3.5 billion years ago, life existed. About 3.5 billion years ago, life existed, and the life which was existed previously utilized carbon dioxide. It utilized carbon dioxide, secreting oxygen or releasing oxygen. Right? Only gas that was present, carbon dioxide. It used to metabolize with the carbon dioxide like plants. Right? Back then, it was phytoplankton or blue-green algae. Huh? Oxygen wasn't there. Oxygen is so rich in the earth, but the large amount of oxygen is only present in the form of oxides rather than free radical or free oxygen. Free oxygen is not present back then. OT is not present, but O is present like FeO, ferrous oxide, like oxides it is present, the combined, right? So whatever the oxygen that is actually released, it is because of the plants, right? Because the plants has flourished for millions and millions of years or billions in a way, right? So obviously oxygen released into the atmosphere. Okay, so that is because of carbon dioxide. So obviously how the carbon dioxide is present, the plants are taking carbon dioxide, right? So and the carbon dioxide is released by different animals, because the animals which formed later on started taking oxygen, releasing carbon dioxide, right? After the industrial revolution, because of the industries, carbon dioxide is being released, right? So whatever the carbon dioxide that is being released, the life plants, photosynthetic organisms are taking that carbon dioxide and releasing oxygen, right? In this way, so the carbon dioxide, the carbon is actually moving among the earth as well as the organism. And when we die, the carbon components will be decomposed and ultimately resulting in carbon dioxide, right? So the glucose will be broken down, forming carbon dioxide later. Okay, in this way, the carbon cycle, right? And finally, the rock cycle. So, sorry, not finally. The next one is the rock cycle. What is this rock cycle? It is not the biogeochemical cycle, but the normal cycle, geocycle, where we have three different types of rocks: igneous, metamorphic, and sedimentary. And every rock can be transformed into every other rock. Every rock can be transformed into every other rock. That means igneous can become metamorphic and sedimentary. Sedimentary can become metamorphic and igneous. Metamorphic can become sedimentary and igneous. Okay. So how can one rock can be transformed into the other rock?
Erosion.
Igneous rock or the metamorphic rock can become sedimentary because of erosion. Right? So, and the next one, sedimentary can become metamorphic by high pressure and temperature, by chemical reactions. And metamorphic or sedimentary can become igneous by high temperature again. Right? Because of high temperature, igneous rock is nothing but the solidified magma or lava. Igneous rock is nothing but solidified magma or lava. So obviously, because of the volcanic eruption, because of the high temperature, the rock particle melts. And when it gets solidified, whichever the rock, it can be the sand, the sedimentary, or it can be the metamorphic marble, whichever the rock that may be, with high temperature, it will become liquefied. Right? So that liquefied, when it is solidified, it becomes igneous rock. Right? In this way, one rock can be transformed into another. Okay. So the next one is a nitrogen cycle. Nitrogen cycle is very much important. Why? Because nitrogen is not, nitrogen cannot be fixed. Atmospheric nitrogen cannot be utilized directly. Humans or any other organism other than a few bacteria cannot take atmospheric nitrogen directly. But nitrogen is very much important. Why nitrogen is important? Amino acids, right? The proteins. Right? So all the amino acids are made up of nitrogen only, right? So that's why nitrogen is a very important component, but we cannot directly take it. Even though the highest amount of the gas in the earth is nitrogen. Nitrogen is the highest amount of the gas, but still we cannot use it. So that's why the atmospheric nitrogen is actually fixed in the form of nitrates and nitrites. In the form of nitrates and nitrites by bacteria, right? So we have three processes, right, which is actually involved. The nitrogen fixation, right? The nitrogen fixation, the bacteria are called nitrogen fixing bacteria. So we have the diazotroph, azotobacter, rhizobium, right? They take up the nitrogen and fix the nitrogen in the form of nitrates and nitrates in the soil. Yeah, root nodules, right? Rhizobium leguminosarum. Right, in the root nodules, right? It will fix, right? It is a tumor. They cause tumors to the plants, plant roots. In the tumors, they'll fix the atmospheric nitrogen, right? So from the soil, the plants take up nitrogen, and we are eating the same plants, and we will get the nitrogen that way, right? Or if we eat meat, so obviously those animals will be eating grass. So in that way, one way or the other, we are getting nitrogen from this source. And when we die, again nitrogen will go back.
Sir, if human find the nitrogen in the plants, then
Humans, the tumors are caused by various reasons. And unfortunately, now is not the time to discuss all this. Right? This is a revision class, and tomorrow you have examination.
yes.
Okay. Unfortunately. So we cannot go for many queries. I do remember. Because even I want to finish it off. Right? I have shared long back. Yes, it is there in the group. So that means you are not even referring to your own groups whether the material is present or not.
Very long before.
I'll remember this. Okay. The nitrogen fixation, diazotroph, azotobacter, rhizobium. The next one, nitrification. Right. So nitrification is a process of fixing the atmospheric nitrogen in the form of nitrates, right? So that is used by nitrosomonas and the nitrobacter. Next one, denitrification, the conversion of nitrates and nitrites into atmospheric nitrogen, right? Reversal reaction, that is by Pseudomonas and the Clostridium, right? Pseudomonas, please do remember, Pseudomonas putida, it is an oil-eating bacteria. Pseudomonas putida is an oil-eating bacteria, which is important. Okay, so that is the process of, nitrification is the process of conversion of ammonia into the nitrates and the nitrates. That is the nitrification process. Nitrogen fixation, nitrification, and denitrification. This is the entire nitrogen cycle. Clear? So the next one, phosphorus cycle. The phosphorus cycle is very much important. Why? Because the phosphorus is important for energy. ATP, adenosine triphosphate, the energy molecule, NADP, nicotinamide adenine dinucleotide phosphate, right? These are the energy molecules. Whenever the body requires energy, these ATP and NADP are broken down to release the phosphate and 7.2 or the specific kilocalories of energy. That energy will be utilized by the reactions, right? That's why phosphorus is very much important, right? Phosphorus is very much important. The earth has so much amount of the phosphorus in the soil, right? So during the water, whenever there is rainfall, the phosphorus will be released into the aquifers. The phosphorus from the soil will be released into the aquifers, and we are drinking the water. We are getting the phosphorus. That is the reason why we call it mineral water, because we have minerals which are essential, the micro elements which are essential for the survival, right? So when we die, again phosphorus will go back into the soil, right? So in that way, the biogeochemical cycle. The next one, sulfur cycle. So in just as recently as half an hour ago, one of our friends have come up with a question saying that which of the following is a biogeochemical cycle? In that, all these are put together, right? So sulfur is there, phosphorus is there, carbon is there, and nitrogen is there. So among those, which one will you select? Obviously, everything is the biogeochemical cycle, but when it comes to the sulfur, right? When it comes to the sulfur, there is a point which you have to remember. This is the only micro element which is required in the body in lesser quantities, because the sulfur is utilized only for a few bacteria and also in our body for disulfide bridges. That means for a protein to establish a stable configuration, a stable three-dimensional conformation, so it will form disulfide bridges between the polypeptides or within the polypeptide. So that's why if the same question is asked, choose sulfur cycle. So how do we get the sulfur? So most of the sulfur we get by the volcanic eruptions, right? Volcanic eruptions, right? So, and also the few bacteria, right, will utilize the sulfur, metabolize the sulfur, and will fix them. And through the plants, we are getting that sulfur, and they are taking it from the soil, right? So that is sulfur cycle. The finally, assimilation and dissimilation, this is not required. So the next one, the levels of organization. There are a few terms which you have to remember. The first one is population, right? In the population, so when you're counting the populations, obviously there are different parameters where we specifically denote to a particular organism or a group of organisms, right? The first one is keystone species, right? The keystone species, key means important, right? So important species, a species which is disproportionately linked to large number of other organisms in a geographical area, we call it keystone species. That means if you remove that organism, right, the entire food chain and the food web will be disrupted. Humans are an example. Yes, humans are a keystone species, right? So those are the keystone species that is disproportionately connected to large number of organisms in a food web. That means I will be eating, today I ate mushrooms, tomorrow I'll eat another product, and the next day some other thing, night I'll eat some other thing. So I'm linked to large number of other species in a food web. Those kind of species are called keystone species. The next one, biotic potential. So potential, so obviously what is the capacity, what is the caliber, right? So what is biotic potential? whenever you give a particular species unlimited amount of food and ideal environmental conditions, right? So then what will happen? The species will reproduce at a maximum rate, right? That is the only thing we will be doing, right? If the resources are there, that means you do not have to work, right? And ideal environmental conditions are there. So obviously what you will be doing? Reproducing, that's all. No other job, right? So obviously even now, actually, you will be marrying and think about reproduction only when you get settled. When it is difficult for you to survive, you will not think about marriage, right? No chance of reproduction. So unlimited food plus ideal environmental condition, the species reproduce at a maximum rate. We call it the biotic potential.
Sir,
Right? What is the maximum rate at which? Yes.
Only for human.
No, for any other species, the same condition.
Animals want to.
No, they will. They will. So give them unlimited amount of food and ideal environmental condition. The only thing they will be doing is reproduction.
No, sir. If not, they want to. Food is not there, and I should not.
They will not have any idea. If you are dying of hunger, if your partner comes for sex, what will you do?
Animals.
Animals also. You are an animal, yeah. Right? Definitely, I wouldn't think about that. Reproduction. Right? The same. No, imagine. So you think about the larger perspective in a larger scale. If the food is not available, right? That means the population is decreasing. So availability of the partner is also difficult because they are scarcely distributed and finding a partner. Think about a whale,
Yes.
right? So for the whale, ideal environmental conditions are not there. It has to search across the oceans for the partner to mate, right? So that is a basic example for us. So every organism, environment and ecology, don't think about humans is different and other animals are different. We are the animals, right? Unfortunately, we can study about ourselves. That's all. That is the only difference, right? So the next one is carrying capacity. The carrying capacity means the maximum population that an environment can support and sustain, right? If the population increases, what will happen? The COVID happens, right? These kind of calamities can kill large amount of people, right? So obviously, if you are scarcely populated, there are a few islands which have only the population of 500 to 1000. COVID is nothing is there, right? The population is very less. But when you are in a densely populated area, any disease can spread faster, right? Because within the small room, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8.
4, 6, 7, 8.
Right? So obviously, if one of us has COVID, tomorrow every one of us will have COVID. Right? So that is carrying capacity. The maximum population and environmental could sustain. After this carrying capacity, the birth rate equals death rate. Arfat? Someone is. Right? So after this carrying capacity, birth rate equals death rate. The population will not increase beyond that. That is steady state equilibrium. That is called steady state equilibrium. Beyond that, the population will not increase. Right? Even the Earth is actually nearing to the carrying capacity where the birth rate and the death rate of humans will equal. Right? So it was now we are going to 8 billion, right? It is around 10 or 11 billion, I guess. So beyond that, birth rate equals death rate. The population will not increase beyond that point. So the next one is the community, right? Within the community, we have to talk about how the organisms interact, right? Interspecies interaction. This is what we actually study about. Sorry. Yes, interspecies interaction. When you're talking interspecies interaction, there is commensalism, amensalism, the competition, exploitation, neutralism, and mutualism. These are the ways where the species interact. So obviously, as you can see in the graph, so if both have a negative effect, that is competition, right? That is competition. If one has a negative effect, the other doesn't have any effect at all. That is amensalism. That is amensalism. And one has a negative effect, one has an positive effect, exploitation. The British, India has a negative effect. They have a positive effect. Exploitation. Corona is different. Corona is, yeah, that is also the exploitation or parasitism, as we say. Exploitation of parasitism. For microorganisms, we use the word parasitism, right? Parasitism, right? The next one, none has any effect, right? That is neutralism. One has no effect, the other has positive effect, commensalism, right? The positive mutualism or symbiosis, right? So what is this example of negative effect and no effect? One species has no effect, the other species has negative effect. Has no effect, the other species has a negative effect. How?
Coronavirus. We have negative effect. Corona don't have any.
Why it doesn't have any effect? It is surviving.
But no
It is for the it is for the positive benefit of the bacteria. That's why we call it exploitation or parasitism. Think about the example in the last we'll discuss. The next one is
for living.
huh?
Is it only for living?
Obviously.
ecology.
So the next one is ecological succession, the concept. The ecological succession is nothing but, so when you take a geographical area into the consideration, over the period of time, the flora and fauna in the geographical area changes. We call it succession or ecological succession, right? So many years ago, the place we were living was in Urbana. So obviously it used to be a forest, right? Gradually the succession has happened and the flora and fauna has changed now, right? The animals which were living back then are not living now, right? The entire thing has changed. That is called ecological succession. In the ecological succession, we have two different types of succession, primary and secondary. The primary succession and the secondary succession. The primary succession is where the entire biodiversity is totally lost and then the new life start to exist. That is the primary succession. That means suddenly there is volcanic eruption, right? So obviously because of the lava, the entire life will be wiped off in a geographical area. But when the temperature cools down, gradually the plant starts to develop, the animal starts to develop, right? So that is called the primary succession. And the secondary succession, because of any other calamity, so obviously the life which is actually present, the dynamics of the life changes. All right? Suddenly, have you seen the web series C? Anyone? No. Okay. So I will tell you an example about this that web series. There is a web series called C, right? Jason Momoa is the actor, the Aquaman, right? In that, the world got some kind of a disease which wiped out most of the humans, right? And the people who survived, they lost eyesight, right? Because they lost eyesight, they gained other abilities. But because of that change alone, the dynamics of the earth changed, right? The other species started to grow, right? Other than the humans, right? Humans started to decrease, right? So obviously the dynamics of the population changed. That is called secondary succession. The life was there previously and after as well, but the dynamics changed, right? Okay, in that way, the primary and the secondary. The next one, ecosystem. So obviously when you're talking about ecosystem, we have to discuss different types of ecosystem. Anyway, we have discussed the definition of ecosystem. The first one being the lake ecosystem, the freshwater ecosystem, right? So when you talk about freshwater ecosystem, we will never talk about riverine ecosystem. The something called riverine ecosystem does not exist. Why? Because we cannot study. Why we cannot study? River flows. So there is no static biodiversity there to study, right? It is not a unit. It is not a system to study. It is totally dynamic. So you cannot study it. The same way avian ecosystem you cannot study. Immediately you say the bird and you note down there is no bird, right? It will just fly away, right? That you cannot study avian ecosystem, right? That's why these two we will remove. The other ecosystems we'll study. In the freshwater ecosystem, we have the lake ecosystem. In this, we have different regions called the limnetic region and the littoral region. Littoral region means the shores. Limnetic is the open waters in the middle, right? Limnetic and the littoral region. And in this, we have the different zones, euphotic zone and the benthic zone. So when you're talking about euphotic zone, means the region till which the penetration of the light is there, right? The region at which the penetration of the light is there, it is called the euphotic zone. And finally, the base of the lake is called the benthic region. Benthic zone. The base of the lake is called the benthic zone, right? When you talk about biodiversity of a ecosystems, obviously of lake ecosystem, we have the aquatic, we have the plant life, the photosynthetic organisms, which are categorized into different types like emerging plants and floating plants and submerged plants, right? Emerging are the ones which emerge out of the water from the benthos, and the floating plants, lotus, right? And finally the submerged plants. And you can see the plant life only till the penetration of light is there. Beyond that, you cannot find any plant life. Only in the euphotic region you can find plants. Beyond the euphotic region, you cannot find any plants. Okay. So the next one. So when you're talking about abiotic factors, we have the light, temperature, wind, and the chemical molecules present in that chemistry, right? So the concept which we are going to discuss here, winter, spring, summer, autumn, is nothing but thermal stratification of a lake. Thermal stratification of a lake. That means stratification means formation of different layers. Formation of different layers. So this usually doesn't happen in the tropics. It will happen only in the temperate regions. In the tropics, it will not happen because the average temperature will not go beyond 4. Never, right? So it will never be 0 in the tropical regions. The temperature will never be 0. That's why this stratification will not be considered for us. But when it comes to the temperate regions, obviously, because during the winters, the surface temperature will be 0, the formation of ice is there. But within the deeper waters, the temperature will always exist as 4 degrees. Why? Pressure?
Temperature lower than ice. Temperature is saying that pressure will be high in upper layer.
Yes, pressure will be very high. But that doesn't mean the temperature will be high or temperature will be less. Yeah.
Pressure will have temperature. Because warm water will
pressure and temperature are inversely proportional.
Yes, sir. When the pressure will be high, then
PV is equal to nRT. Sorry.
Currents.
PV is equal to nRT. Yeah, pressure and temperature are directly proportional. Pressure and temperature are directly proportional. PV is equal to nRT. The ideal gas equation. PV is equal to nRT means pressure is directly proportional to the temperature.
Transfer of pressure.
PV is equal to nRT. So it is directly proportional, not inversely proportional. So don't take that into the consideration. Don't take solely the temperature and pressure into the consideration. No. Here, the reason why it exists in 4 degrees is because the water has the highest density at 4 degrees. That's why it will not go beyond it. Yes. Right? The water has the highest density at 4 degrees. That's why it will not become solidified at that temperature. Right? And only the top cover will be at 0. Right? And the bottom temperature, because of higher density, it will exist always as 4 degrees centigrade. That's why during the temperate regions, obviously they can take cold bath easily because the lakes are actually warmer than the outside temperature. Right? So whenever the spring arrives, so obviously the surface temperature will also become 4 degrees, temperature increases. So because of this temperature change, we'll have turnover. Right? That means the bottom water will come to the top, top water will come to the bottom. Right? Because at 4 degrees it is high density, right? So when the top water becomes 4 degrees, right, this become highly dense and it will go down. and the bottom water will come up, right? And because of this turnover, right, nutrients are getting recycled in the lake, right? That is how the organisms living at the bottom of the lake could survive, because of this stratification and because of this turnover, right? Again, the summer happens, right? The bottom 4 degrees and finally above 22 degrees, and whenever the autumn comes, again the turnover happens, right? That is stratification, thermal stratification. And the life which is actually present of the bacteria, primary producing invertebrates, vertebrates, as we can see, right? There is no explanation required for this. The next one, saltwater ecosystem. When you talk about saltwater ecosystem, so we have various number of ecosystems because the water bodies are very large. So this is the anatomy of a sea, how it actually exists, right? So we have the shelf, the continental shelf which we have. So obviously from that we have a slope. So we have the canyons over there, and we have the abyssal plates, and we have the rift valleys, right? So everything we have within the oceans. So other than that, whatever the shores that we have, so in the shores we have different types of ecosystems, right? So it is very difficult to sit that way, right? The cross, is it okay? Okay, right? So when you take the marine water ecosystem into the consideration, this is the cross section, the ecological cross section of it, rather than the geographical cross section. This is the geographical cross section, this is the ecological cross section. So we have the pelagic region, right? So the pelagic region is the region where the water actually exists, right? In this we have the neritic region and oceanic epipelagic region. So neritic region is something which is till the slope begins, right? So as we go into the water, so obviously the ships will be visible only till that particular distance, right? Right? So that is the reason where the slope actually there. So the ships cannot come beyond that region, right? Till that particular time we call it neritic region, right? And in this we call it epipelagic, mesopelagic, bathypelagic, and abyssal pelagic. So we have segregated this region of the ocean into the 4 regions depending upon the penetration of the light. Depending upon the penetration of the light. So epipelagic region is the region which has high amount of sunlight, and mesopelagic decreases, and bathypelagic is the twilight region, and abyssal pelagic no light at all. Right? Abyssal pelagic no light at all. Beyond 4,000 meters there won't be any light. It will be only dark. Right? And bathypelagic is a twilight region. Right? It looks like something is there, but you cannot see anything. The twilight, the evenings, whenever the power is cut, right? So obviously after certain you can find things, right? A little light will be there somewhere. That is a twilight region, right? So that kind of region, that is bathypelagic and mesopelagic, where the light decreases, and epipelagic is complete sunshine. And in the epipelagic region you can find the photosynthetic organisms more, right? The blue-green algae and all. So the next one, the ecosystems. The first one is the salt marsh ecosystem. So when you're talking about the salt marsh ecosystem, so these are the land regions which are saturated with salt.
Salt.
Yes, salt.
No salt water.
No, salt, usual salt. Right? They're saturated with salt. The entire area, the salt will be there because the water will be there. And when the water is stagnated, when the water evaporates, the salt will be deposited, right? So the entire salt is actually saturated in the salt marsh ecosystem. In this, whatever the life that is actually present, right? The plant life, that right, that can tolerate high salinity, right? Those are the organisms which are adapted to tolerate high amount of salinity. Okay. So the next one, intertidal region. Intertidal region is the most sensitive region in the ecosystems, in the marine water ecosystems, right? When it comes to the intertidal region, so obviously we can find various number of organisms. And what is intertide? The region between the high tide and the low tide, right? That is called the intertidal region. The region between the high tide and the low tide, that is called intertidal region. That is a highly sensitive region. right? Where you can find the plenty of life. You can find small fishes. You can find somewhere the puffer fish. You can find sometimes the crabs and all, right? So obviously the sponges you can find, right? All this you can find in the intertidal region, right? And also snails you can find, right? These are things. Starfish you can find. These are the things in the intertidal region. And the next one, the most important one, is the estuaries.
What is the difference between tidal and intertidal?
There is no tidal region. There is only intertidal region.
Intertidal.
Yes, intertidal. Intertide means between tides, between high tide and low tide, right? So tidal region, if you are using tidal region, that means the region which is being influenced by the tides in a way, right? So that is intertidal region. That is CRZ1, that falls under CRZ1, Coastal Regulatory Zone 1, which is highly protected. Okay. So the next one is the estuaries. So estuaries are the regions where the fresh water meets the marine water. Estuaries are the regions where the fresh water meets the marine water. And estuaries are so important because 60% of the world population is present in the estuaries. And those are the regions which were developed, right? Because the fresh water is available, drinking water is available, and the marine water is available. Marine water actually gives you the wide array of food and resources, right? So that's why this is the reason which is of utmost importance, right? So the estuaries. Next one is the lagoons. The lagoons are the water bodies. Lagoons are the water bodies that were separated from the main sea, right? Lagoons are the water bodies, larger water bodies which are separated from the main sea, right? The example is the Chilka Lake. Chilka is the largest saltwater lake, as we say, right? So it is a lagoon. It was separated by the land, right? It was separated by the land. It is in Orissa. You can see whenever you go there, right? Chilka Lake. Yes, Orissa. Right? So lagoons. The next one, mangrove ecosystem. The mangroves are also important ecosystems because the mangroves protect the coastal region from erosion. Mangroves protect the coastal regions from erosion. And the plants which are actually present in the mangroves are modified because they are water saturated regions, salt water saturated regions. And when the land has too much of water, plants cannot grow, they cannot breathe, right? That's why the roots of the mangrove trees are modified. Roots of the mangrove trees are modified, and we call that modification as nematophores or breathing roots. Nematophores or breathing roots. Nematophores or breathing roots. They'll come up from the soil and they will breathe. Right? These are nematophores. You can see the spines kind of things on the floor here. Right? Those are roots actually. Rather than going within the soil, they come up so that they can breathe. Right?
Sunlight will directly fall on the roots. There is no problem.
There is no problem for them. The actual roots are there inside. These are modified roots. Right? And these roots cannot do not perform any photosynthesis, so no issues. So the next one is the coral reefs. Again, this is one of the most important because the more amount of biodiversity is present in the coral reefs. What are coral reefs? The coral reefs are the polyps or the secretion, calcium carbonate secretions from the polyps, the organisms, right? So when the polyps are present, so obviously they have the phytoplankton growing on it, and to eat the phytoplankton, many other organisms comes, and for those organisms, the other organisms comes. So that's why the coral reefs have greater amount of biodiversity, right? Unfortunately, because of human stupidity, the corals are bleaching, right? Corals are bleaching, right? We call it coral bleaching, which is a serious threat to the biodiversity, aquatic biodiversity. And because of the coral bleaching, we are experiencing the less amount of oxygen as well, right? Hypoxic regions, right? Hypoxic regions. What do we call them? What are those hypoxic regions? We call them dead zones, We call them dead zones, the hypoxic regions within the ocean waters. And recently we have identified one of the world's largest dead zone in Indian Ocean, and the other one is in Arabian Sea. Right, in the Arabian Sea we have the largest dead zone, and recently, maybe 2 years back, we have identified the new dead zone in the Indian Ocean region. So threats to the coral reefs, you can read it. I do not have to tell you.
Yes.
Right. So the next one, coral reefs in India, that is the geographic concept that is not actually required for environment and ecology. Right. And anyway, you know, the fringing reefs at all and the barrier reefs. The coral reefs in India, the Park Bay, Gulf of Mannar, Gulf of Kutch, Andaman Nicobar, and Lakshadweep. So deep sea, right? Deep sea or the sea floor. Just a minute. Amma, కొంచెం బిజీగా ఉన్నానమ్మా, క్లాస్ తీసుకుంటున్నాను. చెప్పానమ్మా. Okay, the next one is the deep sea and the sea floor. So obviously when you talk about the sea, so deepest place in the ocean, the Mariana Trench. And we know beyond 4,000 meters, there is no penetration of the sunlight. So the organisms which are present in the deeper layers of the waters are adapted to the high pressure conditions. We can see the same thing in Aquaman. Right, the same quotation was used. The body is so adapted to tolerate high pressure. That's why for the Aquaman, even if you put so much of pressure, even if you hit him, nothing happens, because the body is so strong to tolerate that amount of pressure. That means for the Aquaman, imagine if you're talking about 4,000 meters, right? If there is an organism below the 4,000 meters, that means the organism is actually weighing or keeping the weight of water which is for 4 kilometers. The entire weight it can tolerate. Yeah.
Actually, some theories say that so many dangerous species are inside.
Exactly. So far, we have exploited only 5% of the oceans. Rest 95% we don't know what is actually present. So in the deeper regions, there are many dangerous organisms. Yes, we don't know. There can be living fossils as well. The organism which has remained since the time of dinosaurs might also be present.
And
you don't know.
More theories about aliens. They can they didn't see the deep sea, so there might be chance of aliens.
Anything which we do not know is an alien. Relative. Alien, the word alien is a relative, so we don't know. Let's not talk about it. Right? If I start talking about aliens, the concept will go somewhere else. Right? So the next one, deep sea and the sea floor. So the organisms can survive higher pressure conditions, and also because there is no light, they have bioluminescence. Right? Because there is no light, they have bioluminescence. That means they glow. Right? They glow. Okay. The next one is the biome. So obviously there are different types of biomes. Right? So for the ecosystem or the biome, the ecosystem or the biome is one and the same. Right? The biome is group of ecosystems. So they are one and the same. So that's why, depending upon the temperature and dryness, we can categorize the ecosystems or the biomes into different classes. Right? If the temperature is high and the dryness is high, we call it a desert. Dryness means amount of rainfall. Dryness means amount of rainfall. If the rainfall is less, the dryness is more. Right? That's why we are categorizing in the form of dryness. Yes. 5 centimeters. 25 centimeters. Desert. Less than 25. Right? So we have the classification. Right? So in that way, we have the deserts, we have the grasslands, we have the shrublands, we have the temperate forest, we have the tropical forest, and tundra. Right? Tundra is a cold desert. Tundra is a cold desert, and whereas normal deserts are warm deserts, dry deserts. Right? So the next one, in the subarctic regions, we have the boreal forests. Right? The coniferous, as we speak, the coniferous forests. Right? And in India, we have all the different types of forests other than sorry, even the Arctic region, right? The cold deserts are also present, Himalayas, right? So India has every type of ecosystem, right? And because of altitude, we have the boreal forest as well in the Himalayas, right? We have every type of boreal forest or coniferous, the pines. So these are the different types. So yeah, as you can see, the amount of rainfall and also the classification, right, that you can read. The next one, Indian ecosystems. So when it comes to Indian ecosystem, India has more amount of tropical moist deciduous forests. Right? Obviously, in India, we will be having only deciduous forests. Right? What are deciduous forests? What are deciduous forests? Oh. What are deciduous forests? Deciduous forests are the ones which shed their leaves. Genius people. Right? Which shed their leaves because India doesn't have plenty of water. Right? It is dependent on monsoons. India is dependent on monsoons. So only three months or the 4 months will be having plenty of water. What about the other days? Right? So obviously it has to shed the leaves. So we call them deciduous forests. And depending upon the amount of rainfall which we have, so we classify them as moist deciduous and the dry deciduous. We have more amount of moist, and the next place occupies by the dry deciduous. And obviously we have deciduous forests. Do we have evergreen forest? Yes, we have evergreen forest in the Western Ghats, Andamans and the Assam, northeastern. Right? So that is Indian ecosystem. So the next one, different types of the same ecosystems. The tropical rainfall, where the tropical rainforest is, where the deciduous forest, temperate, coniferous, alpines, deserts, grasslands, where they are actually present. Right? You can read them. Okay. So the next one, the trophic levels. What do you mean by trophic levels? Trophic level means the energy levels. Trophic levels means energy levels. So we have different types of energy levels depending upon the amount of energy we are reaching. Right? So we are getting plenty of energy from sun, but we will not be able to utilize the entire sunlight. Right? So whatever the amount of energy the plants were able to assimilate, among that energy, only some energy is being stored and the rest amount of the energy is being utilized for the metabolism. Right? Whatever the energy that is being absorbed, some is being stored and some is being used. And whatever the energy that is being stored, the entire energy is not being transferred to the next species, which is eating plants. Only 10% of the energy will be going from one trophic level to the other trophic level. That means if I eat you, how much energy you might have? So obviously I'll be getting only 10% of the energy you have. Only that will be transferred, right? That is called pyramid of energy, right? From one trophic level to the other trophic level. So primary level is nothing but the producers. The second one is the herbivores, and the next one is the carnivores. In the carnivores, we have the primary carnivores, secondary carnivores, and the tertiary carnivores. Right? These are the different trophic levels. Right? In that way, when energy is being transferred from one organism to the other organism, so only 10% of the energy is being transferred. Right? So the next one is the food chain and the food web. So technically, ideally, there is no food chain. Only for the study purpose there is a food chain, but there are no such thing called food chain because you will not be eating the same organism every day. You'll die. Right? So usually we have the food web. Food web is nothing but the integration of all the food chains. Next one, the pyramid of energy, as you can see. So if the plants take 20,000 kilocalories, the next one 2,000, next one 222. Right? In that way, will be there is a deduction, and the amount of energy is being utilized for the metabolism and for storing, and the rest will be lost in the form of heat. Rest will be lost in the form of heat. Right? Even we have temperature, right? To maintain the heat, the energy is being utilized. Next one, pyramid of numbers. When you talk about the pyramid of numbers, right? So the count of organisms living, right? In this, we have the different types of pyramids. The structures of the pyramids are totally different, right? So for the terrestrial ecosystem, it is upright because the grass is more in number, right? When you count, so obviously you have to count individual grass. So obviously producers will be more in number. In ozone urbana, if you count, the humans are more or plants are more. Obviously, the grass, plants, everything, right? The producers are more in number, right? So that's why it is an upright pyramid. Gradually, the number decreases, right? And the next one is the pyramid. The pyramid of number is actually inverted. So you can see the inverted pyramid here. The pyramid of number. Just a minute. Is the PPT only, right? Yeah. Laser pointer. I can take the laser pointer. As you can see, the inverted pyramid. So obviously, when you see the inverted pyramid, where in which case, when you consider the parasites and the hyperparasites, the pyramid is inverted. When you hyperparasite means the parasites which are living on the parasites. You do you know the lice, cockroach, or so on the cockroach there won't be any parasites. There will be, right? In the lice also we have parasites. So within the parasites there will be hyperparasites, the bacteria or the ones which are actually living on those organisms. No, a hyperparasite is the ultimate. Yes, because on bacteria you cannot find another bacteria eating on it, right? So that's it. Okay. So the when you consider parasites and the hyperparasites, so obviously in a tree ecosystem, when you consider a tree, there will be only one tree. So the base producer is only one. On the tree there will be many birds, right? The number increased. So among the birds there will be many parasites. Right? In one bird there will be many parasites. So number increased. On those parasites there will be many hyperparasites. So that's why the pyramid is inverted. So the next one is spindle-shaped pyramid. So when you consider the same tree ecosystem, but if you do not consider the parasites and the hyperparasites, so when you consider a tree, right, producer is one,
Yes.
and herbivores or the small birds,
Many.
that will be many, and but there will be only one or two eagles on a particular tree, right? That most trophic level. So obviously decreases. That is a spindle shape, right? That is spindle shape. The next one, pyramid of biomass. So when you talk about biomass, what is a biomass? Biomass is entire organic content in the body without water. The entire mass of an organism without water. That is biomass, right? That is biomass. So when you talk about biomass, so obviously when you take terrestrial ecosystem into the consideration, the number of plants are actually more in number. Obviously, plants are more in number because of which biomass is more. So when you consider one animal and one tree, so biomass of the tree is high, right? So overall together, if you accumulate the biomass of humans and the plants, so obviously we should be more. Exactly, right? So that's why in the terrestrial ecosystem, the biomass is upright, right? Biomass is upright. But when it comes to the aquatic ecosystem, it is inverted because we have only phytoplankton in the oceans, right? The biomass is very less, but eating the phytoplankton, we have the small fish and large fish in that way. So in this way, we have inverted pyramid. So the next one, the concept of bioaccumulation and biomagnification. When you consider bioaccumulation and biomagnification, as you can see, bioaccumulation is nothing but the toxic components getting accumulated within the same organism over the span of its lifetime. Right? That means we are saying the chicken are being fed with antibiotics. If you keep eating this chicken, so in your lifetime, after some amount of time, when you become old, so none of the antibiotics will work for you. you will become antibiotic resistant. Because antibiotics are already accumulated. Bacteria present in my body are tolerant to the antibiotics. Right? That is bioaccumulation. The toxic components getting accumulated in the body over the lifetime because of intake, the smaller intakes.
This is the reason why the old time the kings were used to live long.
No, we never used to live long. We never
They have
used to
so
live
much of
long.
strength and
No, the strength is different. Only few people used to live longer back then. Many people used to die below 30. During the independence, during the time of independence, life expectancy was 28 years. The average life expectancy, now it is 68. Because at that time, medicine was not developed, right? So whenever they used to get the disease, they used to die. Only few people used to live longer, that's all. Average life is always less. Right? So because of diseases, they used to die. And also because of poverty. Right? Because of all these reasons, they used to die. Right? So the next one, bioaccumulation. Bioaccumulation is nothing but another example of bioaccumulation is the side effects for a drug you take. Drug means that not that cocaine and all, medicine, right? So when you're taking medicine, obviously it will have side effects, right? Why does it have side effects? Just a minute. Hello, Jaydeep. Good afternoon, yeah. Over here. Maybe next time. Yeah. Baby, I'm taking a class now. Okay. Yeah. Bye. Yeah. So the bioaccumulation, the same, the drugs. And next one is biomagnification. Biomagnification is nothing but, so if there's a plant, so obviously we are saying the pesticides are bad. Pesticides are really bad for health. But when you're spraying pesticides in a 1 acre of crop, in 1 acre, if suppose if there are 1,000 plantlets, and you're spraying 1 case, right? 1 case. That means on an average, every plant will get 1 gram, right? But you will not be eating only 1 plant, right? You will be eating more plants. So gradually, what is happening? So from the plant has only 1 gram, because I will be eating 2-3 plants entire in my lifetime. So the toxicity or the concentration of chemical components in one trophic level to the other trophic level increases. And if there is a tiger which is eating humans, right? So tiger will not eat only 1 human and say I am satisfied, right? Every day it will eat, right? So gradually, so it has 1 gram, plant has 1 gram, because I have eaten 3 plants, I have 3 grams in my body, and because the line has eaten about 5 humans, it will have 5 3 is 15 grams.
sir, you said that if we eat that, we'll get 10%.
10% energy, not toxic components. The energy is different, right? I'm talking about the chemicals present in the body, how we are taking them, right? That is biomagnification. From one trophic level to the other trophic level, the concentration of the toxic components increases. That is biomagnification. Accumulation, within the same organism, it is getting accumulated, right? But magnification, it is increasing from one trophic level to the other trophic level, right? So the next one, we are discussing biodiversity. When you're talking biodiversity, so what is biodiversity? Diversity of life, different types of life present on the earth, right? That is biodiversity, right? So when you talk about biodiversity, why do we have to study biodiversity? Because it is offering, delete, clear all the drawings, because it is offering various services. Biodiversity is offering different services, right? Because the basic thing, it is providing you food, right? And it is providing you entertainment, right? Obviously, Didn't you go to any beach or didn't you go to any park? Didn't you go to any?
Center Park
Yeah.
Did you go? Why did you go? Huh?
Please enjoy.
Exactly, that is recreation, right? People go to waterfalls. People go to forests, right? To see the wildlife, right? That is a recreation. Have you seen the lion and get fascinated? Yeah, it is really awesome. Did you feel happy? No? You will see only humans. So far, you did not see any other animal. That is also one animal, obviously. Did you feel happy? Then see, recreation. Nature is giving you recreation, right? So those are the different services that are being provided, right? So just a minute, pointer, right? So the next one, biodiversity in India. The statistics are a bit changed. So now we have 24.4% of the geographical area under the forest and the tree cover. Please remember 24.4, right? 24.4, right? That you have to remember.
Before it was 23.
Previously it was 23.39.
When it changed?
1 year back, 1 or 2 years back, right? We have the new forest report. In that, it has increased by 1%. The larger increase has actually happened with the state of Andhra Pradesh. The first place went to Andhra Pradesh when it comes to maintaining the tree cover and the forest cover, right? So it's in 2019, the next report, and again in 2021 we'll get the new report, right? The Indian Forest Report every 2 years. India Forest Report will be updated every 2 years. Every 2 years. Okay? India Forest Report. So the next one, IUCN. What do you mean by IUCN? IUCN is an international organization which is actually categorizing, which is counting the organisms and categorizing them into various sections so that we can protect those species, right? Yes, we can protect the wildlife. So IUCN is full form is International Union for the Conservation of Nature. International Union for the Conservation of Nature. In this we have different categories. The most important category is critically endangered and vulnerable, right? We call them threatened species. That means the species which are threatened with extinction, right? That means if you do not protect them, they will cease to exist on the surface of the earth. We can never see them other than in the pictures. Yes, right? So those are threatened species. We have 3 categories within the threatened species: vulnerable, endangered, critically endangered. Vulnerable means the population has become so less that if you do not care about them, they'll become endangered. Vulnerable. Vulnerability. So if I'm saying I am vulnerable to pain, that means I cannot tolerate. So they have become vulnerable because the population has become so less. They are vulnerable species now, right? Because we are killing them, right? In that way, vulnerable, right? So the next one, endangered, which are danger and critically endangered. Only this, when it comes to critically endangered species, we'll have only handful, around 100, 90, 80. Only that is the maximum, and in the entire world, that is critically endangered. And the next category is extinct in wild category. The species has become so less that if you keep them in the wild, they'll die. Right? That means if there are only about 10 species, 10 population is actually present, 10 individuals of some species is actually present. So obviously you cannot keep them in the wild and ask them to survive. Any predator can eat them.
Protected area. Protected area.
Yeah, in the protected we are protecting the endangered and critically endangered.
Forest area.
Yes, yes. So in the extinct in wild category, we will not keep them in the wild. We will not keep them in the protected area network. We'll bring them to the lab and we'll try to increase the population. Right? Only when the sufficient population has reached, or in the zoological parks, when the only population increases, only then we'll release them into the wild. That is what extinct in the wild. In the wild, you cannot see those species. In the wild, you cannot see the species, right? That is extinct in wild.
So in Africa,
In Africa, the cheetahs are.
So in Africa, the cheetahs are very huge number of species. Again, they will use.
No.
No. No. Right, only the species, it has to be only handful, just within 10
So if
something.
we don't have any wildlife in our India, the outer Africa or other country, they will export their wildlife. Why?
No.
China.
No.
Panda, sir.
What?
Panda, China.
Hmm.
And given rent to the every country.
Renting in the sense they'll be given the finances, that's all. They will not give the panda. You cannot change the locality, you cannot change the ecosystem of the panda, but you can fund them. In the wildlife, there is something called adoption, right? The wildlife adoption, you will be giving the money, that's all. You will not bring it to your home. Right?
Sir, but
That no country has pandas except China.
Exactly.
And they are not giving.
They won't give because they might die. The population has come so less, right? And also there are endemic species. We call them endemic species. Endemic in the sense, the species which is present only in that geographic area and nowhere else. Kangaroos. Only in Australia you can see the kangaroos, nowhere else. Right? So in that way, and no country will try to bring the species that doesn't belong to that particular geographical area. Why? Because it can bring different pathogens, and the population can become so high that the native species might die. There are many dangers along with that. We call them invasive species, right? It might become invasive. We don't know. So that's why we will not be bringing the species directly from the other countries, right? But we will be funding them for the development. Okay, so importance of the biodiversity. As this is easier to explain, the provisioning services, regulating services, supporting services, cultural services. Provisioning, food, fiber, right, and water, and the regulating services, the climate and diseases, supporting services, nutrient cycling and the crops, and the cultural services, spiritual and recreational. So obviously, right? So the next one, Indian biodiversity. So obviously this is a static area, you can read it. Biomes. After teaching all this, if you read biomass, biomes as biomass, the people will see me. Right? They will not tell anything about you. Right? So this is all static area that you can read. Right? That is not the conceptual one. Yeah. So the next one, threats to the biodiversity. Right, the next one is the threats to the biodiversity. There are 5 major threats to the biodiversity. The first one is the climate change. The next one is the deforestation, the habitat loss. The next one, over exploitation, and the next one, invasive species and pollution. Right, when it comes to the climate change, that is a serious problem present in India and the world, across the world. Why the climate has been changing? Because the amount of carbon dioxide that is being released
very high.
Exactly. Right? Since the time of industrial revolution, we are releasing more amount of carbon dioxide into the atmosphere. Right? And we are releasing more amount of the carbon dioxide than the plants can assimilate. That is the problem. Right? The plants can fix CO2. Right? But we are releasing more amount of carbon dioxide than they can assimilate. So that's why the net carbon dioxide is increasing every year, which is a greenhouse gas, trapping the atmospheric heat, increasing the surface temperature, causing the global warming, right? And also the climate change, right? So we'll see what are these threats. So obviously, the planet's average surface temperature has actually increased to 2 degrees Fahrenheit, about 1 degree since the time of industrial revolution. Right now, we are trying to cap this increase. Right, we are trying to cap this increase. That is what the Paris treaty, right? COP21, right? UNFCCC, right? Yeah, United Nations Forum for the Climate Change. You don't know? So we have come together to act on the climate change, and in the COP Conference of Parties 21, all the countries have accepted to cap the average global temperature for the next century, right? For the next century. So obviously we have to cap the increase to 1.5 degrees centigrade and further put our efforts to cap it to only 1 degree, right? That means for the next century, there has to be the increase of only 1.5 degrees. That's all. If it is successful, we have to further increase our efforts to reduce it to only 1 degree, the maximum raise. If it is growing beyond, it will be too dangerous and disastrous. Okay. So the evidences of climate change, obviously shrinking of ice sheets, the warming oceans, the glacial retreat, decreased snow cover, that you can read. I do not have to explain all this nonsense, right? Yeah, you only explained in the class. Wonderful. Right, this is all not required. The other concept, ocean acidification, please look into the concept of ocean acidification, which is good, right? So whenever when it comes to the ocean acidification, because of the increase in the atmospheric carbon dioxide, it is getting dissolved, or it is being absorbed by the waters. It is being diffused into the waters, forming carbonic acid. And the carbonic acid is again split into the bicarbonates and the carbonates, releasing H+ ion concentration. And increasing the H+ ions is called ocean acidification, right? So which actually happened during the time of 60 million years ago, during the extinct of the dinosaurs. At that time, the ocean acidification has happened so much so that the octopus lost its shell. Yeah, because of acid acidification in the oceans, octopus also used to have a shell on its body. The shell was lost. It melted. Right? Many species died. Many aquatic species died. And the one survived, got deformed. And new species came to existence. Right? So because of ocean acidification, obviously the many species are actually at the threat. And also because of ocean acidification, the coral reefs are damaged. If coral reefs are damaged, no food for fish, right? That is ocean acidification. The causes of climate change, we have the natural factors and the anthropogenic factors. When it comes to the natural factors, the continental drift. So obviously, you know, the tectonic drifts, obviously when the continent is moving from one geographical area to the other geographical area, sunlight is varying, so the climate changes. But it is a very slow process. Yes. Yeah. Convectional. Convectional. So the next one, this is useless. The fossil evidences for continental drift. Right. The next one is the variations of the Earth orbit. We call it Milankovitch cycles. Right. So there are changes in eccentricity and tilt, and also the precision, right? Eccentricity, axis, and precision. So there are changes in these three things. Because of these changes, naturally the climate will change, right? When the eccentricity is changing, so obviously the amount of sunlight reaching the earth changes, so climate changes. So whenever the tilt is changing from 23.5, right, to 24.5 or 21.5, so obviously latitudes and longitudes, latitudes changes. So the countries present between those regions will actually experience the climate change so much. And also the precision. Precision is nothing but wobbling effect, right?
Rotation.
Yeah. Rotation. During the spinning, it will not just spin within the different axes. It will wobble like this. Right? So that is it. That is precision. Next one. Because of volcanic activity, that is a natural way of climate change, right? Because of huge amount of gases that are being released, so it will stop the sunlight from entering into the land. Because of this, you can experience the snowfall as well for a certain amount of time. Yeah, because there is no sunlight. Temperature comes so down, right? So next one is the ocean currents. So obviously we have, when it comes to the ocean currents, we have the warm ocean currents and the cold water currents, right? So because of the changes in the course of these ocean currents, we'll experience the climate change. And finally, anthropogenic causes, global warming, carbon dioxide release, right? So here you have to remember the greenhouse gases or the greenhouse effect. Greenhouse effect is nothing but whatever the radiation that is actually reaching the earth is near infrared. When it is reflecting back, it will be far infrared, which will be trapped by the greenhouse gases, right? And because of the increase in the greenhouse gases, because of the increase in the amount of the greenhouse gases, the average surface temperature is increasing, right? No? Yeah, come. Six 6.3. Okay. So that is greenhouse gases, whatever the radiation, infrared radiation, near infrared and the far infrared, that is being trapped. And because of trapping, but tell me, should we remove the entire greenhouse gases? Definitely no. Because if you remove the greenhouse gases, the average surface temperature will fall below 0 degrees centigrade. Life cannot survive. So greenhouse gases are required, but the threshold limit has to be reached. The carbon dioxide has to be has to be in the threshold limits. That is actually increasing. That is the problem.
Penguins are living, how much degree they can survive in that? Because having nearly -4 degree the temperature of the Antarctic Ocean. Even though the penguin will get survive.
ऊपर जाते हैं ऊपर नीचे आती है टेम्परेचर सडन एक ही बार इंक्रीज हो जाता है उसका देखता है इसका से सडन जैसे हमें.
So the important greenhouse gases, the first one is the water vapor. So that is the largest greenhouse gas present in the earth, but we will not try to reduce this water vapor because that is the main important gas for cooling the earth. Water vapor. Right? Precipitation. So that's why we will not consider the water vapor. But the next important gas is the carbon dioxide, right? Because we are actually releasing the amount of carbon dioxide. How do we get to know that the climate change is only because of man-made the carbon dioxide, the man-made the anthropogenic? Because how can you? The question is, how can you define that the climate change is only because of the anthropogenic reasons rather than that of solar irradiation, or because of increased sunlight or some other factors, natural factors? Why we are considering only this? Because the average temperature rise is actually seen only in the troposphere rather than in the different layers of the atmosphere. So that's why we can definitely say that it is purely anthropogenic, right? So the next one is the carbon dioxide. The next one is methane and nitrous oxide. Nitrogen oxide is greenhouse gases. Yeah, right. The methane and the nitrous oxide. The methane is being released by the livestock as well, right? Which is a serious greenhouse gas, and also the nitrous oxide. Nitrous oxide is one of the most potent greenhouse gas where it will stay in the atmosphere for a longer time, and it has higher times more dangerous than the carbon dioxide. It can trap more amount of heat than that of the carbon dioxide, right? Nitrous oxide. And finally the CFCs, or the halocarbons. Halocarbons, the chlorine, fluorine, and the iodine. We call them halocarbons. These are purely man-made, and because of which they stay in the atmosphere for a longer period of time. Chlorofluorocarbons and the hydrofluorocarbons.
Nitrogen will stay for long time. Compared to nitrogen will stay for a long time.
Yeah, obviously. They can stay for 100 years within the atmosphere. So every spray we are using has CFCs.
So it's getting the
Exactly. That's why the ozone depletion and also the greenhouse effect. Right? So that is about the chlorofluorocarbons.
Because of this reason only eco-friendly products are.
Exactly. Only because of these reasons, because of the climate. Right? So we have mandatory obligation as per the Paris Treaty, COP21. Right? We have to reduce. So because of the CFCs, the main problem is ozone depletion. Because of HFCs, we have global warming. Please do remember. HFCs, global warming, CFCs, ozone depletion. The main prime effect. Right? When it comes to the ozone, so how the ozone layer has actually formed when the oxygen concentration has increased in the atmosphere long back, so it rose into the stratosphere with the presence of ultraviolet radiation. Oxygen O2 has split into nascent atoms, and those atoms combined with that of O2 again forming O3. Right? So now what is happening in the ozone layer? So the O3 which is actually present, it is present in the dynamic form. That means O3 will result in O2 plus O, and O2 will split again plus O plus O, and again oxygen will combine with O with the forming O3. So this entire process will be in the dynamic form, right? For the entire reactions, it will be using ultraviolet radiation. So ultraviolet radiation is being used up in the stratosphere. In that way, preventing the ultraviolet radiation from coming. Right? Yeah. Ozone layer. It is not reflection. It is using. That means if I ask you to bring some sweet from somewhere, and in the process of bringing it, if you ate it, I will not get anything, right?
No.
The same logic here. So ultraviolet radiation is coming in between the process. Ozone is actually making the bond and breaking the bond utilizing ultraviolet radiation. So it is not coming to the air. Right? So that is the logic actually. It is not actually reflecting. It is not acting as a mirror. No, exactly. This is what people usually, because the images that are shown like that. Right? Images are shown like that it is reflecting, so that we can understand very easily. Yes. But the reactions are happening using the ultraviolet radiation. That's why the ultraviolet radiation is not reaching the earth, because it is being used up. Right? So this is how it is being used up. Ultraviolet radiation effect on humans. Cancers, yes. Various skin cancers, various cataracts, the eyes, the upper layer of eyes will become white, right? And they'll surgically remove the outer layer. That is the cataract. So that is the cataracts. So obviously all this happens, mutations, random mutations and genetical mutations. Everything happens because of ultraviolet radiation, right? So ultraviolet index in most of the cities is actually really high. That's why they are asking for the sunscreen lotions, right? So that ultraviolet radiation will not penetrate the cells and destroy them. More.
Between D efficiency.
Exactly, increases. Vitamin D will be produced in the presence of ultraviolet radiation. Right? Vitamin D is important for the bones.
But now they are recommending tablets for use, but the tablet will not even directly to
it is better if you stop using the tablets, but unfortunately in India many people are struggling with the lack of vitamin D, right? So that's why the government of India has launched the program called Operation Dhoop to make all the school children stand in the assembly lines in the sunlight, either in the morning or the evening, so that they'll get vitamin D. Because now the schools doesn't have any grounds like IIBS. Right? So that's why Operation Dhoop. Right?
on year, sir.
Huh?
Year. Operation year.
It was launched in 2018, I guess. Operation
Those are pehle. So 2 years before.
three years. 2018, 2018. Yes. Right. So the presence of chlorofluorocarbons, how do they destroy ozone? Right. As you can see in the reaction, when in the chlorofluorocarbons, in the presence of ultraviolet radiation, chlorine will get detached. When the chlorine get detached, it will react with the ozone, forming ClO plus O2. Right. And two ClO molecules will combine together, form Cl2 plus O2. Again, the chlorine will get separated, forming ozone. In that way, every ozone molecule will get converted into oxygen. Right. And every chlorine atom, because it is present for 100 years, it can destroy many ozone molecules, forming the ozone hole. Single chlorine will react with thousands and thousands of ozone molecules, breaking them into oxygen. Right? When they become oxygen, they are no longer ozone. Right? So because of this, the ozone hole. This is ozone hole. Right? And here there is another question: why the ozone holes are present only in the poles?
This might be, sir.
Yes.
That's small hole.
No. Now it is actually healing. Not only in the southern South Pole, we have in the North Pole as well, and the most of the Arctic region. Obviously, if we continue producing the chlorofluorocarbons, that's why, because thanks to the Montreal Protocol, right, the chlorofluorocarbons have been completely phased out. Now we are not using, and now it started to heal. Okay, this is the picture of 2015. Exactly. Yes. 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 So the reason why the ozone holes are present only in the poles is polar stratospheric clouds. So the next one, Montreal Protocol. This is the first time. This is the first time all the world nations have come together to phase out of ozone depleting substances. Please remember year 1987, Montreal Protocol for ozone depleting substances, Kyoto Protocol for greenhouse gases, Kyoto Protocol for greenhouse gases, and Montreal Protocol for ozone depleting substances. Right? The next one, Kigali Amendment. That was the amendment which was to be which came into force in 2019. That is to phase out of HFCs as well. Right? Phase out of HFCs, hydrofluorocarbons, which are potential greenhouse gases. We added that into Montreal Protocol. We added the HFCs into the Montreal Protocol. Right? So that is Kigali Amendment. As you can see here, HFCs, the phase out of HFCs. Right? That is Kigali Amendment. The next one, Paris Agreement. Paris Agreement, as we were discussing. So we have to make sure, sorry, it was my mistake last time. So as per the Paris Agreement, we have to make sure the global temperature rise in this century should be way below 2 degrees compared to that of the Industrial Revolution. That means we are already telling that since the Industrial Revolution, the temperature has actually increased to 1.1 degree. Now we have to restrict that 1.1 there itself to below 2. We should not increase. We should not let it increase by 2100. That means whatever the average temperature. Suppose the average temperature is now the average temperature is around 23. Oh, sorry, 14. Yeah.
Which department will check?
United Nations Framework for the Climate Change. You know, the Department of Environment. Yes. Right. The Minister of Environment. So when it comes to this, so obviously the average temperature is around 14 degrees. Right. 14 degrees is the average temperature. So obviously now it has increased to 15. Previously it was 13. Now it is 14 something. Right. So obviously we should not extend it to 15 and further. Right. And if possible, we have to restrict to 1.5 only. That is the Paris Agreement. We have accepted for that. Unfortunately, from the Paris Agreement, the idiots Americans have pulled out unilaterally. Unilaterally, they have withdrawn from the Paris Agreement, Americans, saying that the Chinese is releasing more amount of the carbon dioxide. It has different rules and we have different rules. Right? So the next one is solar radiation, no thing. The effects of the climate change is same. Evidences of climate change are equal to effects of climate change. You can read them. As you can see here. Right? Arctic region. So how much the polar ice caps have been lost? So the climate change and the wildlife. So obviously, so if there is a average increase of surface temperature to 1.5 degrees centigrade, 20 to 30% of the species will be extinct. Extinct. Will die completely from the surface of the earth. Right? And if the planet warms more than 3 degrees centigrade from the present the average temperature, so many ecosystems will actually change. Okay. So some of the species which are under threatened, which are being threatened, the tigers, snow leopards, Asian rhinos, orangutans, right? We can for African elephants, polar bears, huh? Rhinos. Exactly, horns, poaching. We call it poaching. Illegally mining the organs of the animals. We call it poaching.
Sir, someone has painted for them. Due to that paint, it will not go further and continue. सर वो जो सीन होता है ना उसके ऊपर कलर लगाते हैं उसकी वजह से ना वो कलर कभी भी नहीं मिटेगा और वो काटने वाले भी नहीं होते.
No, now what the forest officials are doing is they themselves are cutting it. They are not preventing it from growing. So when the horns are not there, what is the point of killing it? One-horned rhinoceros. So the next one is deforestation. Next one is the deforestation. The deforestation, as we all know, there is no point of explaining the deforestation. The main reason for deforestation is agriculture, shifting cultivation. Shifting cultivation. Not industrial revolution. It is because of shifting cultivation. Shifting cultivation means the zoom cultivation. That means cutting down the forest area, put down the crops over there. After harvest, go to the new area and cut down the forest there. That is shifting cultivation or zoom cultivation, right? Or slash and burn method. Yes. Last time we discussed why the pollution in Delhi is increasing.
Pollution in Delhi.
You weren't there. That's why you have to be regular to the classes.
Came late, sir. Came late for the
After the classes also.
I
know. Right? So when it comes to Delhi, the Haryana people, the Punjab and Haryana people are following shifting cultivation. And because of this, yes. Huh?
They are doing that cultivation of shifting cultivation. Why, sir? They are shifting.
Let me complete, baby.
And land nutrients.
Right? Obviously. So obviously they'll whenever the plant, whenever the new land is there, so they'll cut down the forest area over that particular place. And because the nutrients are available in a good way, they'll plant the crops. And after the harvest, they'll burn the crop and they'll go to the new area. That is the culture, so that the nutrients will further later in the future will replenish. Exactly, that will be useless. They do not know that, but it is a easy way to dispose the waste, the burning. So the Delhi and Haryana and Punjab people are doing it, and the winds are actually blowing from the west to the east, bringing all the pollution to Delhi.
When the carbon is
exactly, carbon dioxide. So that is the reason. So agriculture is the main culprit for the deforestation, right? So as you can see the statistics, about 300 million people are living as shifting cultivators, right? And more than 5 lakh hectares of forest is being lost annually in India because of the shifting cultivation. 5 lakh hectares. 5 lakh hectares. Year, annually 5 lakh hectares is being lost.
One survey per day, 2 tennis courts is there.
Exactly. Exactly. That much land area is being lost. Yes. Right. And the next one, the next reason why the deforestation is happening is the commercial logging. So obviously for the logs, for the wood, right? Yes, for timber, right? The next one is for the mining, and the increasing population. With the increasing population, we need to have the more area, right? The habitable region, and urbanization and industrialization, and the construction and the dam reservoirs. Obviously, previously this used to be the forest, and everything was deforested.
How it will go?
How it will be?
How it will be saying, sir, that birthright will be there.
Let us finish this. I'll share a video. You watch it. There is a video for that. Okay. Yeah. The next one is the forest fires and the overgrazing. Obviously, when it comes to the forest fires, you already know what happened recently, right? And also in India, also the number of forest fires are actually increasing. Yes, India is experiencing more amount of forest fires, right?
To build a
Maybe 7.5 temperature rise.
Yes. Right. The next one is over exploitation. What do you mean by over exploitation? Exactly, overusing the product even before it can replenish. Right. That is the most important point. That means harvesting the species even before they can actually multiply. That is what we call over exploitation. So we have killed many of the species into extinction, right? Because of over exploitation, as you can see in one of the pictures. This one, right? So the heads of the bisons, the large bulls, Africa bulls were there, right? Bisons, right? Those skull.
Yeah.
So these many bisons we have killed. These many bisons we have killed only for fertilizers. To produce fertilizers, these many bisons were killed. Right? This is just a sample. So imagine how many species we have killed. Right? So as you can see, because of the over exploitation, 6,241 species are affected so far. Right? And because of logging, 4,000, because of hunting, 1,000, because of fishing, 1,000, and because of gathering different plants, we have lost 557. Right? So this is the way. Okay. So the next one, invasive species. When you talk about invasive species is the organism which is actually not a native of this particular area, right? Which is not a native of an area, but it will be migrating from a foreign area and it will multiply rapidly here, providing competition for the other species and letting them die. Right? So that is invasive species. Have you seen this green color tortoise? Many people will grow in their home, right? So, and tortoise has more amount of lifespan.
Yes, sir.
Yeah. They can live for hundreds of years. Yes, a few turtles longer. The tortoise also can live very long.
Tortoise is longer, sir.
Yes, tortoise is longer. Yes, tortoise is longer. Yes. Turtle is the one which is present in the oceans. Tortoise is the one present on the land. And terrapin is something which lives in the fresh waters. Yes, yes. So that is an invasive species. Because the lifetime is very long, what they'll be doing, they'll be releasing it into the near ponds because they cannot carry it for longer, right? Actually, and then it will keep multiplying.
Actually, that thing happened in octopus, sir, over that will get so many
tentacles. What?
Octopus is getting multiplied.
Yeah.
And even if they killed it, and then also it will get multiplied. Somewhere I heard about it.
No, it is not multiply. Even if you kill, it can elongate its tentacles.
Yes, sir.
Yes, that character it has.
China.
Not only that, even the starfish,
Yes, sir. I know.
right? So even if you
But it is a massive. Octopus, massive.
yes, the octopus are large. The larger species. Yes,
Sounded him, sir.
I don't know.
Only
Okay, so those are the invasive species. So species which can actually grow and reproduce at a faster rate and spread aggressively, right, causing harm to the native life. We call them invasive species, right? Yeah, about 42% of threatened and endangered species are at risk because of invasive species, and this is the reason why the bringing another species from the other country is very difficult for us, because it might become invasive. Yes, it might become invasive. It might become dangerous. It will be disconnected.